What's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. It's about 3:02 p.m. where I'm at right now, May 25th, 2024. And today we are finishing our first book for the Book React series on my channel, Cyber Racism, White Supremacy Online, and the New Attack on Civil Rights, published in 2009 by author Jesse Daniels, who is an anti-racist sociologist, educator, and activist. I want to say thank you to everybody who's been tuning into this content, watching the series from beginning to end, everybody who's been jumping into the live stream chat, everybody who's been leaving comments in the playback gang. Shout out to all of y'all. Remember, watch these videos on 2X. It sounds much better here. And I encourage everybody to pick up this book on Amazon for the humble price of $48.79. Though if you need the hookup on more books, holla at your boy. I got the hookup. Holla if you hear me. Oh. And yeah, shout out to everybody who's going to be supporting this wherever you are in the world, whoever you are in the world. We are here to fight for the end of white supremacy. White supremacy is an ideology, and because it's an idea, we need to fight back against it with counter ideas, with other words. White supremacy will not be defeated through the barrel of the gun. It will not be defeated at the tip of a sword. It will not be defeated through the ends of our fist. White supremacy can only be defeated when brave people speak out against it. And this is a dangerous, pernicious ideology that continues to morph over time. Racism and anti-blackness will not disappear just because a new, younger generation is born and all the old people who were around during segregation or apartheid are slowly dying off. No, it continues to morph and change. I experience cyber racism every day when I open my comment section. Every time I go on Twitter, every time I go on Instagram, I see instances of cyber racism and white supremacy continuing to proliferate, change, and evolve for the next generation to pick up the mantle of this evil, wicked idea. And it needs to be defeated. Why? I posted in my community tab last night the story of Peyton Gendron. Peyton Gendron was a white supremacist who got turned up and turned out online after looking at all these wicked memes and wicked ideas online on 4chan, on Twitter, on X, and everything like that, and then decided to walk into a supermarket and slaughter 10 black people. I then watched another video that I didn't post on my community tab, the story of Patrick Crusius. Patrick Crusius, I remember his name. Pardon if I butchered it a bit, but Patrick Crusius was another white supremacist who walked into a Walmart in El Paso, Texas, and slaughtered 20 Latino people. All of this happened in recent time. This is not ancient history. This has not happened in the 80s or 90s. This happened in the 2010s and in the 2020s. What are we going to do to stop this? We know, most likely in America, because of the proliferation of weapons, that there will be another mass shooting, possibly this year. Possibly this year, by the end of this year, there will be another school shooting where somebody will walk into an elementary or a high school and lay out all the kids in the seventh grade classroom. That's a fact of life in America, because Americans think the gun makes them safe, makes them strong, makes them patriotic, makes them men, right? But another wicked thing will most likely happen, maybe not this year, but who knows, but possibly next year or the year after that. Another white supremacist mass shooting. How many other lives have to be lost? How many more people have to throw away and crash out over this stupid idea that continues to change over time? The next generation is not instantly becoming less racist. No. No, the next generation is picking up the ideas of their forefathers, their fathers, and their grandfathers. It will not end just because younger people are born. That same thing would not apply. Nobody would come to the idea that Islamic jihadism is going to disappear just because younger men, younger Muslim men, continue to be born. No, the same thing applies also for white supremacy. Young white men, particularly, though some women are involved from our study of this book so far in the previous chapters, are picking up the mantle of this idea, and something needs to be done about it. So I only have until 5 p.m. until I have to leave to go to work, because I got to teach English after this. So I'm going to try to speed run through these last two chapters. We're reading through chapter 9 and chapter 10. All the comments will be read in my comment section during the live stream. And also, yeah, after yeah, after we finish chapter 10, which is the last chapter of this book, I will probably celebrate and probably pick up the next book that will be a part of the Book React series. Acti and I will be doing movie reviews on my channel again soon. It's been a while because we had a friend over here, plus I've been busy with work and stuff like that. But I promise, possibly today, we will do the movie review for the documentary that I posted on Twitter called Tell Them You Love Me. You should watch that documentary. It's absolutely fabulous, and it's going to cause a great discussion for Acti and I on the next movie review that we will do possibly today, if not tomorrow. But enough of that, enough of the opening spiel. Let's get into chapter 9, combating global white supremacy in the digital era. Let's go to the epigraph right here. In cyberspace, the First Amendment is a local ordinance. This was said by John Perry Barlow. In 2002, Tor W. Tevet, founder of the hate group Vigrid and a Norwegian citizen, was sentenced to time in prison for posting racist and anti-Semitic propaganda on a website. The Anti-Racism Center in Oslo filed a police complaint against Tevet. On Vigrid's website, Tevet puts forward an ideology that mixes neo-Nazism, racism, and religion. Tevet was tried and convicted in the Asker and Bærum District Court on the outskirts of Oslo. The charges were 6 counts of violating Norway's anti-racism law and 1 count each of a weapons violation and interfering with police. He was sentenced to 75 days in prison with 45 days suspended and 2 years probation. Activists welcomed this as the first conviction for racism on the internet in Norway. Following Tevet's release from prison, his Vigrid website is once again online. In contrast to the Norwegian response, many Americans seem to view white supremacy online as speech obviously protected under the First Amendment. Senator Orrin Hatch, Republican from Utah, articulated this view following congressional hearings about hate crime on the internet in September 1999. We must be vigilant and prompt in our efforts to begin eliminating hate on the internet, but we must also do so with exactitude. From this complicated maze of issues, there is simply no simple answer. And with the First Amendment as our country's first premise, we know that any solutions that we endorse must recognize that the surest way to defeat the messages of hate is to hold it under the harsh light of public scrutiny. The U.S. Senate's legislative response to those hearings was to adopt a series of technical approaches, such as filtering software to block particular websites. Both the Norwegian and the American responses to online hate are notably from the democratic nations theoretically committed to egalitarian ideals. In Norway, a man is arrested for creating a website filled with racist and anti-Semitic propaganda, even though the server for that website is located in the United States. Ultimately, the man is released from jail and the website goes back online. In the United States, citing the protection of hate on the internet as the country's quote-unquote first premise, senators take a narrowly focused techno-legal view of white supremacy online by attempting to mandate the use of software filters in public schools and libraries. These examples well illustrate John Perry Barlow's point and this chapter's epigraph that in the information age, the First Amendment, which protects free speech, is a local ordinance, that is, one specific to the U.S. context. Barlow's view about internet regulation, as well as critiques of his views from outside the United States and oppositional views from U.S.-based critical race theorists, can shed some light on these disparate democratic responses to white supremacy online. John Perry Barlow, retiring white Wyoming cattle rancher, former lyricist for the Grateful Dead, and co-founder of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, is a widely known critic of internet regulation. Barlow authored a declaration of the independence of cyberspace, an influential essay written in the polemical style of a manifesto and declaring the internet a place that should remain free from control by governments of the industrial world, which he refers to as weary giants of flesh and steel. In that essay, Barlow also writes that those people online in 1996, would quote unquote create a civilization of the mind in cyberspace. May it be more humane and fair than the world your governments have made before. Barlow variously describes himself as an anarchist or cyber libertarian and believes that government should have no power over the internet and that the only thing, quote unquote, that is dangerous is the one that is designed to stop the free flow of information. Barlow's views are acclaimed and shared by most of cyberculture's leading writers and thinkers in the United States. In fact, it could even reasonably be argued that within the United States, the cyber libertarian view of the absolute protection of free speech online is one that is hegemonic, an idea so pervasive as to be taken for granted as a fundamental, unquestionable truth. In contrast to the cyber libertarian view, critical race theorists have argued that interpretations of the First Amendment that categorize hate speech as protected speech effectively arm quote unquote conscious and unconscious racists, Nazis, and liberals alike with the constitutional right to be racist. My purpose here is to complicate both views in light of the research presented in the rest of this book about white supremacy online. These two opposing views, one focusing on the internet, the other on race, reflect the point I made earlier, chapter 2, that most theorists about race do not take the internet into account, observation when it comes to hate speech online. A number of critical race theorists have begun to explore the implications of this theoretical perspective for the information age, and some cyberculture writers have thoughtfully considered hate speech in digital media. The discussion here is intended to contribute to this emerging literature by using a comparative transnational perspective to understand the global response to white supremacy online. In this comparative analysis, I first take up a number of illustrative examples of responses to white supremacy online outside the United States and then contrast them with analogous responses inside the United States, returning to two cases discussed earlier in the book. For example, Machado and Juhari. The United States response to white supremacy online is markedly different from that of other democratic nations and has been referred to as the cyber hate divide. I explore the significance of this divide by examining the case of France versus Yahoo Inc., the California-based international internet company, while others have focused on the case's implication for American notions of free speech. What it reveals about transnational responses to white supremacy online is equally interesting. I then shift from this comparative analysis using selected case studies and offer a more theoretical analysis. I locate the different responses between the United States and other democratic nations within the conceptually opposing views of cyber libertarians and critical race theorists. In the last section, I analyze the connections between online extremists, white supremacy, and mainstream white supremacy through the lens of interpretation and implementation of the First Amendment and the Patriot Act in the United States. I place this comparison within the theoretical tradition of critical theory, drawing on Marcuse's notion of repressive tolerance to clarify the links, namely the American absolutist interpretation of the First Amendment, which views of white supremacy online as protected speech, is an interpretation born out of a white racial frame, rooted in colonialism and stands at odds with the wider democratic global community. Responses to white supremacy online and transnational perspective. Efforts to combat white supremacy online extend across national boundaries. In fact, according to one scholarly assessment, there has been a quote unquote nearly unanimous international institution of regulations restricting online hate speech. While in the earliest days of the internet, many people imagined a borderless world in which the regulation of nation states no longer mattered, now that expectation is beginning to fade away. Instead of a truly global network, the internet is increasingly a collection of nation-state networks still linked by the internet protocol, but for many purposes separate. Today, national governments around the world can and do make laws that govern the content posted on the internet or sent via email. Australia, Canada, Denmark, England, France, Germany, Israel, Italy, Norway, and Sweden are among the long list of nation-states that have taken such action. Governments and democratic societies are supposed to be responsive to their citizens, and this responsiveness should extend to considering white supremacy online. In the Norwegian case described as the beginning of this chapter, a citizen-led non-governmental organization, NGO, prompted the government to take action against Tor W. Tvedt's online white supremacy. The Anti-Racism Center in Oslo filed a complaint against Tvedt, citing his racist website, and since the Norwegian government had an existing anti-racism law on the books that extended to white supremacy online, they honored their law and responded swiftly. individual citizens acting apart from any institutional or governmental affiliation can elicit government response. For example, Canadian citizens Richard Warman has, over the past 6 years or so, lodged 15 different complaints with the Canadian Human Rights Commission against white supremacists who use the internet to persecute Jews, blacks, and gays and lesbians, among others. As with the Norwegian, pardon, okay, I got to refresh the page. Sorry. Hold on. Sorry about that. All right, let me pick up where we were. Sorry, sometimes that happens. Apologies. Where were we? American Civil Rights Review. Yeah, we're on chapter 9 right here. All right, searching for civil rights. No, this is chapter 8. Okay. Sorry, guys. Sorry for anybody listening in the playback. All right, responses to white supremacy online. All right. So, yeah, we were on this organization right here, this paragraph right here. Let me do something real quick. I'll be right back. I have to put the key under the mat for my wife so when she comes back from the gym. Pardon me. Apologies for anybody listening who just wants to go with the flow. So, continuing here. So, individual citizens acting apart from any institutional governmental affiliation can elicit government responses. For example, Canadian citizen Richard Warman has, over the past years or so, lodged 15 different complaints with the Canadian Human Rights Commission against white supremacists who use the internet to persecute Jews, blacks, and gays, lesbians, among others. As with the Norwegian NGO, Warman's complaints find traction in Canada, where anti racism laws, including prohibitions against white supremacy online, are already enacted. Such individual actions by citizens like Warman do not occur in a vacuum. They take place within specific national contexts with particular cultural and social histories. And of course, these contexts vary tremendously. For the United States to have such a wicked history of white supremacy, let's keep it absolutely real. Like in Norway, they had a shooting where a white supremacist walked into a church, I believe, and murdered a bunch of children. So that's a part of their history. But the white supremacists in America, since the beginning, have been terrorizing Americans. We literally fought a civil war against an entire army of white supremacists. Every few years, like Peyton Gentry, like Dylan Roof, we get a white supremacist mass shooting. For hundreds of years after the abolition of slavery, a white supremacist terrorist organization called the KKK terrorized an entire section of the U.S. population. You would think, because of America's history, that we would have laws about white supremacy online, because this ideology has killed so many people and harmed so many people. Continuing here. In Germany, freedom of speech is a central tenet of their view of democracy, and their interpretation of this right includes bans on certain forms of white supremacy online. For example, the German ban on Nazi emblems like the swastika extends to the prohibition of the sale of such items on the internet. To enforce this law, in March 2008, police in 8 German states raided the homes of 23 suspects as part of a lengthy probe into the illegal sale of right wing extremist literature and audio material. Another 70 suspects were identified in the investigation, which had begun in August of 2006 after the German unit of the U.S. online auction company eBay.inc reported the online sale of far right material. Among the items seized were 24 computers, some 50 memory devices, and approximately 3,500 right wing extremist CDs and LPs. According to a spokesperson for the Federal Crime Office, BKA, the raids were part of the ongoing quote unquote fight against right wing extremism on the internet. These raids demonstrate the internet is not a law free zone. Adjudication of this case is still pending as of this writing. I wonder what's happening now. For anybody who wants to know about that case, look that up. All right. The Germany constitutional framework, embodied in the Grundgesetz, or Basic Law, became the foundation for the German constitutional system in the aftermath of World War II. Drafters of the Basic Law were careful to include broad guarantees of freedom of expression in order to prevent any recurrence of Nazi-style totalitarianism, with the Basic Law specifically noting that, quote unquote, there shall be no censorship. The Grundgesetz conditions all rights and guarantees to free speech on preservation of the right to quote unquote human dignity, that Constitution's most highly prized value. It is within this framework that German legislators have established severe penalties for hate speech on the internet. Even before the emergence of the internet, German law prohibited speech that incited racial hatred. With the dawn of the information age, lawmakers extended the prohibitions to the internet. Germany was the first among Western democratic nations to regulate white supremacy online with the 1995 passage of its Information and Communications Services Act. The ICSA holds ISPs liable for knowingly making illegal content available, has established a cyber sheriff who monitors the internet for objectionable content, and makes it a crime to disseminate or make accessible materials deemed harmful to children. In 1998, the general manager of California-based CompuServe Germany, Felix Salm, was prosecuted and convicted under the ICSA as an accessory to the dissemination of Hitler images and Nazi symbols. Salm's conviction was overturned in 1999, but the case sent a powerful message to all ISPs that they can and will be held liable in Germany for the content on their servers. Although the outcome of this case remains unknown, it reflects a wider pattern of response from the German government. In 2002, the German government adopted a broad strategy to combat right-wing extremism. The quote-unquote four pillars, as they are called, aim to educate all citizens of their human rights, strengthen civil society, and promote civil courage, help integrate foreign nationals into society, and target suspected far-right extremists. This approach acknowledges that it is important and possible to strike a balance between safeguarding human dignity and protecting freedom of expression in a democratic civil society. Germany embraces democratic ideals while seriously addressing the racist, anti-Semitic propaganda that threatens them. Other Western industrialized democratic nations take similar approaches, broadening the scope of their existing anti racism laws to address online racism. In 2001, the Council of Europe, COE's Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights, submitted a report titled Racism and Xenophobia in Cyberspace. The COE, comprised of 47 nations, was founded in 1949 with the ideals of the European Convention on Human Rights as its basis. The report recommended the COE adopt a protocol that would define and criminalize the quote unquote dissemination of racist propaganda and abusive storage of hateful messages. In 2003, the COE passed the additional protocol to the Convention on Cybercrime, an agreement between member states to quote unquote ensure a proper balance between freedom of expression and effective fight against acts of racist and xenophobic nature. There is a disagreement among European nations as to how and when white supremacy online should be addressed at a governmental level. For example, a Nazi symbol is illegal in Germany, but not in Denmark. Still, transnational agreements between European Union, EU member nations address expressions of white supremacy and racism. In a 2007 vote, EU ministers passed a broad anti racism law applying mainly to racist expressions offline. It took 6 long years to finalize the wording of the motion, and in the end, some NGOs, like the European Network Against Racism, complained that the language was too weak. The transnational dialogue is not perfect, but it is vital, and the cross border work of such NGOs is critical to moving the discussion forward. The Amsterdam based International Network Against Cyber Hate, INACH, is an NGO that organizes transnational efforts to fight online white supremacy. Established in 2002 as a foundation under Dutch law, INACH's original mission was to connect online complaint bureaus in a number of different nation states that were actively monitoring white supremacy online. INACH has since evolved to include a cross national network with 14 participating states, called by one leading activist a quote unquote model for international cooperation in the fight against cyber hate. Since 2005, INACH has been administered by American Chris Wolf, known as a leader in the practice of internet law and as chair of the ADL's Internet Task Force. Each year, I'm gonna call it INAC, convenes an international conference of legal, academic, non-governmental, and anti-racist activist leaders to address the issues of white supremacy online. Throughout the year, INAC connects the network nodes or members who actively monitor white supremacy online from Austria, Canada, Denmark, France, Germany, Latvia, Moldova, the Netherlands, Poland, Russia, Slovakia, Spain, Sweden, United Kingdom, and the United States, represented by the ADL. Within the coalition of nation states, the United States represents something of an anomaly. While other democratic nations enshrine free speech as a fundamental right for each of their citizens, they have found ways to simultaneously preserve their citizens' right to human dignity. The American view is quite different. This goes to show that white supremacy in America is blatant. If there was rampant anti-white racism online, there would be laws against it. But they allow anti-Semitism to flourish online, homophobia to flourish online, Islamophobia to flourish online, and explicitly anti-black dogma and words to flourish online in the United States of America, right? And you wonder why that is. You wonder why that is. Is it because America cherishes free speech that much, or because America, by and large, doesn't care about black life and black expression? Of course, freedom of speech is important, but people have the right to be in the public square, which is the internet, the global public square where we can talk to anybody from anywhere in the world and not be racially harassed, not be targeted because of their identity. And of course, you cannot police all human behavior. But there should be laws on the books that guarantee people will be protected and have some sort of recourse from continued attacks on their identity. All right? So, responses to white supremacy online within the United States. In 1999, Richard Machado was the first person to be convicted of using the internet to commit a hate crime, discussed in Chapter 3. Unlike Tevet, the man in the Norwegian case, Machado did not publish a white supremacist website, but rather sent threatening emails. White supremacy online forfeits its First Amendment protection in the United States only when it is joined with conduct that threatens, harasses, or incites illegality. Yet, even when this narrow prosecutorial standard is legitimately met, the law fails to be consistently applied. Uneven prosecution of hate speech is rooted in racial inequality. The only individual prosecuted to date for white supremacy online is a Mexican American, which is disturbingly consistent with racial trends in the rest of the U.S. criminal justice system. Their minority men are suspected, arrested, prosecuted, and incarcerated differently than are whites. In the lone conviction of internet hate speech, the victims were Asian and Asian American, who, because they are often stereotyped as model minorities, might be less likely to interpret and then condemn their harassment as part of systemic discrimination. The victim's lack of public recrimination only made it easier for those outside the case to ignore any connection it had to white supremacy. When Bonnie Juhari reported that she and her daughter were being targeted by Roy E. Frankhauser's online threats, local authorities in Reading, Pennsylvania, neglected to enforce the law, believing that to do so violated Frankhauser's right to free speech. Juhari's biracial daughter and work at HUD, assisting minorities, made their household a target for white supremacist harassment, and her gender situated her as a comparatively powerless member of society, thus rendering her attempts to get protection from the legal system ineffectual because her complaints were given less legitimacy. Interpretation of the First Amendment and what speech it protects is often in the hands of local law enforcement officials, and so Juhari was powerless when they refused to assist her. Eventually, Frankhauser was prosecuted only after additional legislation was passed by Juhari's employer, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, which moved to create new legislation to protect employees from racially motivated harassment. And though William A. White posted to his website threatening messages along with the names, addresses, and telephone numbers of the African American youth involved in the Gina 6 case, as of this writing, he has not been prosecuted. Why? White remains free is troubling, as he is well known to local and federal law enforcement officials. The prosecution of white supremacy online seems to rely on racialized notions of whose speech is protected. White supremacists Frankhauser and White, and whose is not, Mexican American Machado. Sadly, rather than prosecuting online white supremacy, the United States prefers to hide behind a techno legal stance and advocate filtering software. So once again, very, very interesting that the only person prosecuted so far as of 2009 for online hate speech and harassment was a Mexican American man, a brown Mexican man, right, for harassing some Asians, which goes to show, I said this before in the video I did, I believe it was part 2, talking about the Machado case. White supremacy affects everybody. This is a evil ideology that not only affects black people, it affects gay people, other ethnic or national minorities in America or in any country where white supremacy exists. It affects women, it affects Asians, it affects all groups of people, and it affects white people as well, because the white supremacists also kill each other too, right? Like, let's not forget that this evil ideology needs to be defeated for the sake of all mankind. Continuing here. Techno-legal responses. In fall of 1999, the U.S. Congress held hearings on hate crimes on the internet, mentioned in the opening of this chapter. Following the hearings, legislators decided that mandating internet filtering software was the best way to deal with white supremacy online. Filtering software uses key themes or words, for example, racial epithets, to block some websites from appearing in searches. With filtering software installed, a search engine query for information that is on the blocked list will trigger a pop-up window to appear that informs the user that the site they are searching for is prohibited. None of the text or images from that site load into the user's browser. In 1999, Congress attempted to require public libraries to use filtering software capable of screening out white supremacist and pornographic sites on computers used by children. The proposed legislation would also have required internet service providers, ISPs, to offer the necessary software to their customers free or at cost. The legislation also made teaching and demonstrating how to make explosives a crime. This bill failed to pass into law, largely opposed due to concerns about the First Amendment and protection of free speech. While national efforts have been unsuccessful, one state, Arizona, passed a law in 1999 that mandates public schools and libraries use filtering software. In practice, even without the legislative requirement, most public libraries and schools in the United States frequented by children do use, sorry, most of the schools and libraries in the U.S. frequented by children do use filtering software. Since 1999, the issue of white supremacy online has failed to receive national legislative attention, an approach both deeply flawed and characteristically American. For a number of reasons, filtering software is grossly inadequate to addressing white supremacy online. First, it offers a technological solution to what is an inherently social problem, and such solutions are doomed to fail. Also, the software typically blocks only certain predetermined words and themes, which the deceptive cloak sites will have no trouble sidestepping. Furthermore, filters frequently block sites not intended for censorship. For instance, a block programmed to exclude any sex related sites will include terms that also appear on legitimate sites, filtering out any websites about breast cancer or other medical concerns, in addition to pornographic sites. In a related issue, the filtering software infringes on the First Amendment rights of children. Chris Hansen, a senior lawyer with the ACLU who specializes in internet matters, argues that children have the right to obtain material such as sexual and reproductive health information, even if some adults find the information offensive. In addition, children who may be wondering about their own gender or sexual identity are usually blocked from exploring LGBTQ sites because gay civil rights organizations are included under the filtering umbrella of pornography. In the early days of the internet, when Congress first held hearings on hate crimes in the internet, anything associated with the online world elicited an air of panicked moralizing. Managing online white supremacy with filtering software was a quintessentially American response. The decision was premised on an unwavering faith in American ingenuity to conquer all obstacles, completely ignored race as central to the problem, and included a market-based approach that relies on software companies to produce and sell filtering programs as the centerpiece in combating white supremacy online. If the proposed legislation had passed, it would have required all public schools and libraries to install filtering software. The one or few private companies who won those contracts would have enjoyed an economic windfall. Yet white supremacist content online would have continued to proliferate unchecked. And so passing legislation to mandate filtering software would have profited the few, confirmed the American can-do mythology, and entirely ignored white supremacy's racial component. Online online white supremacy can be addressed not through a solution that relies exclusively on market-based strategies and benefits an elite few while discounting a racial analysis. Market economy responses. The American approach to handling white supremacy online has routinely featured market economy responses from leading companies in the internet industry, most notably AOL, America Online, and Google. AOL, the internet division of Time Warner, has emerged as the world's largest internet service provider, ISP, with some 21.7 million subscribers in the United States and Europe as of 2005. Unlike other ISPs, AOL's original business model was known as a walled garden model. That is, they offered a proprietary network of content, online shopping, and other services to AOL paid subscribers only. This changed in June 2005 when AOL began offering free access to certain features and content. Even after this shift, AOL continues to advertise itself as a safe internet environment. Jonathan Miller, the company's CEO, was asked in an interview whether or not there was still reason to subscribe. He said yes, because AOL, in particular for kids, is very much tied up in providing a safe environment. AOL uh, has fairly aggressively marketed itself as a safe online space because of its vigilance against pornography, though they have paid comparatively little attention to racism online. The Rules of the Road, or Terms of Service (TOS) agreement used by AOL prohibits attacks based on personal characteristics like race, national origin, ethnicity, or religion. Yet AOL provided hosting for the website of a KKK group, the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan realm of Texas, and did not regard the site as violating its terms of service. It was in this context that the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, challenged AOL to adhere to its own TOS agreement, which states that AOL has the right to remove content that they deem harmful or offensive, quote unquote, and remain the Klan website, and remove the Klan website. AOL declined, arguing that even the KKK's racism is protected under the First Amendment, and pointed out that the AOL search engine does block the use of some terms. AOL prohibits the search of terms like the N word, the K word, the SLUT, and WHORE in their members directory and its site, nor can member profiles include such words. While AOL has been criticized by activist groups like the ADL for its inconsistent enforcement of its own TOS agreement, white supremacists like David Duke see such enforcement as infringing on their constitutional right to free speech. Duke posted the following to his personal website in 2002. The ADL works to ensure that commercial ISPs create terms of service that limit what their users can read or say. By lobbying commercial carriers to censor their users, the ADL achieves their aim of outlawing free speech and expressions without the constraints of the First Amendment's protections. Here, Duke sounds like any other American concerned about encroaching on his civil liberties. Duke's rhetoric, when separated from the anti Semitism in the rest of his posts, fits seamlessly with that of others who would argue that the First Amendment is intended to protect his speech. Non governmental organizations like the ADL can bring political pressure to bear on internet industry companies like AOL to get them to enforce their own TOS agreements. But when the First Amendment is popularly seen to protect white supremacy online, internet companies are put in a difficult position. From the perspective of AOL, they are caught between upholding a constitutional right and removing content that is clearly offensive and in violation of their TOS agreement. I just have to say this: every internet company, every company in general, is not obligated to uphold freedom of speech within the confines of their business, right? Like YouTube will remove my channel if I consistently talk about how much I hate X group of people and why an X group of people need to perish from the face of the earth, right? That's what YouTube will remove. But if YouTube has a culture that says we will uphold all freedom of speech, of course they're going to allow everything to proliferate. But nobody would want to use that platform, right? Nobody would use YouTube if they didn't have some sort of filtering or blocking software to prevent people from just spamming the N word under Black creators' comment section. Nobody would use YouTube if they turn to the front page and the biggest video of that day is a man getting decapitated. Nobody would would use YouTube if there was CP all over the platform. Of course, you need filtering software and stuff like that. Of course, you need freedom of course, people should have freedom of speech, but there should be a limit to freedom of speech. Because once again, the double standards are so blatant, and I'm surprised nobody brought this up in the book, or Jesse Daniels didn't write this in the book. But has anybody ever encountered ISIS's website? ISIS has a website. Al Qaeda has a website. All the Islamic terrorist groups have websites. But KKK.com gets to stay up on AOL, even though they are literally a terrorist group just as much, if not worse, than Al Qaeda, than ISIS, if you follow me. But white supremacy in America says, well, the KKK, they have a point of view. Maybe there's two sides. Maybe the KKK needs to express their side of the story. Let's make this absolutely clear. There is not two sides to everything. Racism is wrong. Slavery is wrong. Anti-blackness is wrong. White supremacy is wrong. There is no two sides to it. There is no two sides to it. Continuing here. Google, the search engine company whose motto is "Don't be evil," has had its own encounters with white supremacy online. In 2004, Steven Weinstock, described in press accounts as a quote-unquote real estate investor and former yeshiva student, did a Google search using the term Jew and was shocked to find that Frank Weltner's anti-Semitic website, JewWatch.com, appeared first in the Google search results. Weltner, you will recall, is the white supremacist who also published the Cloak sites soliciting donations for victims of Hurricane Katrina and maintains the Cloaked American Civil Rights Review site, discussed in Chapter 7. Weinstock began an online petition in an effort to get Weltner's site removed from the Google index that produces search results. He hoped that if he could amass 50,000 requests to remove the site, Google would comply. Although his petition fell far short of this goal, he got about 2,800 signatures. It would not have mattered. According to Google spokesperson David Crane, the company, quote unquote, can't and won't change the ranking for JewWatch regardless of how many signatures the petition attracts. Crane went on to say that Google's search results are solely determined by computer algorithms that essentially reflect the popular opinion of the web. Our search results are not manipulated by hand. We're not able to make any manual changes to the results. Think about this. A lot of people, whether they be virulent, explicit anti-Semites or not, believe the Jews control everything. There are some people, unfortunately, who are well-meaning, good people, unfortunately, but they perpetuate this idea: the Jews run media, the Jews control everything. A Jewish man typed in the word Jew on Google and saw that one of the most prominent sites on the first page was JewWatch.com. That's all about Holocaust denial. That's all about talking about how wicked and evil the Jews are. He contacts Google and says, hey, the first site is very racist, anti-Semitic, and needs to be taken down. And Google says, hell no, it won't go. Think about that. Think about that. Think about if you typed in, I don't know, people who are fighting for freedom, and the first result was ISIS or Al Qaeda in Google. Do you think Google would keep that up? Don't you think Google might get a call from some higher ups that said, hey, maybe you need to change the search engine? If the first result on Google were people who are fighting for freedom and you saw the Taliban, Google would take that down. Google would take down Al Qaeda, but JewWatch.com, an anti Semitic website, stayed up on Google's first page. Do the Jews really run everything? No. So, everybody, please stop all these anti Semitic tropes, anti Semitic stereotypes, saying that Jews run the world when they couldn't even take down JewWatch.com off Google. That's explicitly racist. And very interesting that David Crane said, the reason JewWatch.com is the number one website on the first page of Google is because that's the popular opinion. That's what people seem to like. So we're going to keep it up. All right. Let's stop that. Let's stop that. All right. Continuing here. So this is both true and not true. Google receives about 30 requests per month to remove specific pages from its search results, usually because of alleged copyright or trademark infringement. And Google complies with most of these requests, even though many of those pages are located on servers outside the United States. When Google issued the statement through Crane, it was true that Google was not in the habit of altering the results of their algorithm based on political content. But by 2006, Google had followed chief competitor Yahoo Inc. into China. In order to receive permission from the Chinese government to gain access to its enormous market, Google would first have to restrict the results of their algorithm to block any sites about human rights, democracy, Tibet, Taiwan, and the Tiananmen Square uprisings. At the World Economic Forum in Switzerland, Google CEO Eric Schmidt explained the decision-making process this way. We concluded that although we weren't wild about the restrictions, it was even worse to not try to serve those users at all. We actually did an evil scale. Google executive said that its approach in China would be to notify users when results had been blocked by the government. Google applied a similar strategy to search results for Jew. Weltner's Jew Watch site is still first in Google's search engine results, but in response to protests by Weinstock and intervention by the ADL, above the result for Jew Watch is a message from Google warning of quote unquote offensive search results. Google.com/explanation. With small text on that page that reads, "We're disturbed by these results as well," followed by an invitation to please read our note here. For those who follow the link, Google offers a lengthy explanation with this central argument. A site's ranking in Google search results relies heavily on computer algorithms using thousands of factors to calculate a page's relevance to a given query. Sometimes subtleties of language can cause anomalies to appear that cannot be predicted. A search for Jew brings up one such unexpected result. That's wild. That's wild. They could easily take that down because JewWatch.com is not helping anybody. People that already hate Jews will continue to find JewWatch.com. And besides, the URL is not that hard to find or look at. You get what I'm saying? Like, people that already dislike the Jewish people do not need Google's help in finding that content, right? What Google should do is take the site down. Should have done. Who knows what has happened since 2009? Once again, this book is well over 11 years old, 12 years old, and stuff like that. It's an older book, but still, the fact remains: the fact that Google didn't take that down shows extreme cowardice. All right, so the Jews got Ilona Muskie a concentration camp tour. The Jews gave Ilona Muskie a concentration camp tour. Yeah, but still, it's still wild that there's still so much anti-Semitism on Twitter, right? Even the Jews do not run everything, and I hate seeing that in my comment section. Or I hate seeing that from people online saying all these negative things about Jewish people. All right. Ozzy says basically it's all about money at the end of the day. But literally, Google has all the money in the world. So we cannot buy out Google, right? Imagine if you type black people into Google and the first website was nigger.com. The first result. And then you click it, and it's a white supremacist website showing black people being lynched and all the reasons why black people are less intelligent than other groups of people. So, Google is not making any money. It really seems like Google is doing this to be spiteful. Because what is anybody to gain by clicking JewWatch.com? Or if black people are associated with nigger.com in the search results. You get what I'm saying? Uh, but yeah, it's not always about money because the white supremacists are not motivated by money. It's not like Peyton Gentry killed 10 black people and made $1 billion after. It's not like Dylan Roof is now a multimillionaire. These people are willing to crash out for this idea. It's quick. It's easy for people to say everything is about money a lot of the times because most people don't have money. But the number one people who are the most influential in the world are the ones who usually didn't have money. Jesus didn't have money. Muhammad didn't have money. The Buddha didn't have money. You get what I'm saying? Many of these white supremacists who write these manifestos and stuff like that don't have money. It's all about the ideas. Ideas are things that move the world, not money in and of itself, right? Continuing here, the subtleties of language that Google attributes casualty to here are the subtleties of language, quote unquote, that Google attributes causality to here are the distinction between Jew and Jewish in common usage. Google's explanation page points out the social and political context of the usage of these two words, in which the former is, quote unquote, often used in an anti-Semitic context, and the latter is more likely used by members of the community talking about their faith. This acknowledgement of the anti-Semitic context marks a curious and impartial departure from the usual business of search engines in which information is presumed to be free of social and political context. It is curious because there is no similar disclaimer above the search engine results for a search for other common racial or sexual epithets, such as a common racial epithet for African Americans. And it is impartial because, along with Google's disclaimer about anti Semitism, the Google algorithm also returns related searches, including Jew jokes. The response to white supremacy online from internet industry giants AOL and Google may seem contradictory at first. AOL wants to provide a safe environment, yet allow KKK websites. Google claims the company operates according to its motto, don't be evil, though JewWatch remains at the top of the search returns, and the company blocks pro-democracy websites for users in China. These responses are not all contradictory when viewed through the lens of cyber-libertarian interpretation of the First Amendment and neoliberal capitalism. The cyber-libertarian ethos that information exists apart from social and political context, for example, information wants to be free, allows white supremacy online to continue unchecked and is beneficial to the internet industry as a whole. For internet companies operating within the framework of cyber-libertarian ethos and neoliberal capitalism, matters of race are always viewed as irrelevant unless and until they are seen to be interfering with the smooth operation of the market system. Of course, the supposedly free market approach of neoliberal capitalism relies heavily on nation states to operate. Nation states, by maintaining the rule of law, provide the infrastructure necessary for companies like AOL and Google to operate. AOL and Google could not exist in the anarchy that prevailed in Russia in the 1990s or in the failed states of Africa, where the lack of basic public goods would make thriving internet businesses possible. As long as the status quo of white supremacy online does not threaten the profits of those in charge of large corporations and their shareholders, racism will continue to be regarded as irrelevant. All right. Nelson Moreno says, no need for a Whitey watch. There's already sex offenders list. That's hilarious. That's funny, bro. That's so funny. That's funny. That's funny as fuck. No need for Whitey watch. We got a sex offenders list. 4chan is BBC watch. Absolutely. I also got them bars. The bars up. No, Ozzy says she's cooking. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Even though this book is very old, it's very true. You know, many of these internet websites rely on some consistent engagement. And like I said in my previous live stream, the internet is basically two things: a mix of pornography and shit talking. This is what the internet all is. The biggest sites all have a mix of people in the comment section going at each other, and every post somehow relating to pornography in some way. All right, I'm continuing here into the text. If someone posted online their clear intention to violate the Prohibition Against Discrimination in Housing Act guaranteed by the Civil Rights Act of 1964, then surely that would constitute a form of white supremacy online that the courts would address, or so thought some activist lawyers in Chicago. It was this logic that prompted the Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under law to file suit against the online classified advertising site Craigslist.org, arguing it violated the Fair Housing Act when real estate ads displayed racially discriminatory statements like "no minorities," quote unquote. A judge in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that Craigslist.org was not responsible for the listings, as they were simply a messenger and should not be liable for the content of the ad. Furthermore, the judge in this case ruled that monitoring the ads for discriminatory language was, quote unquote, impractical due to the complexity of the task, quote unquote. And indeed, the model developed by Craigslist founder Craig Newmark relies on an extremely small staff of people to run the site, fewer than 20 people, while users throughout the world do the bulk of the work of posting and responding to ads. Any user on any Craigslist can flag a post as inappropriate, but this is a far cry from the site itself eliminating racist ads in clear violation of the Fair Housing Act. In effect, the judge in this case ruled in favor of the market economy, giving Craigslist a free pass because to do otherwise would be impractical and complex. Given the expansion of white supremacy online, the simultaneous unwillingness of U.S. courts to address it, and the ineffectiveness of techno-legal and market economy responses, the task of responding to white supremacy online in the United States is left principally to three NGOs and the rare individual. Very, very crazy that, on Craigslist, people would post up, hey, my apartment is for rent, but no Latinos should apply. Hey, my apartment is up for lease, but no blacks. That was allowed on Craigslist, and that's possibly still happening on Craigslist. I would never rent an apartment from Craigslist, but who knows what situation could happen in the future. But that's crazy. I'll never forget living in Miami. Everybody was using Backpage. Everybody was using Backpage in Miami in like 2015 and 16. And then when you would go to look at the working girls, a lot of the working girls, the white and Hispanic working girls, would say no black men. A lot of the working girls would post all the time, no black men. Baddies with fatties who are looking for daddies for the night, looking to get it off for $30, 30 minutes for $100. No black men. No black men, right? Very crazy. But the thing is, if on Craigslist there were people trying to hire hitmen to murder their wife or murder their husbands, do you think the judge would then say, hey, Craigslist, you're not responsible for this, and continue to allow people to hire hitmen to murder their spouses? Do you think the judge would say that? No. Of course, if somebody is trying to violate the law, if they're speaking about it openly, publicly, on a website, they should be prosecuted. And the website that's allowing that to continue to happen should be responsible as well. But it's America, right? Freedom of speech. Let the free markets figure it out. Black lives do not matter in America. Going to Nelson here. Daycare workers needed. No whitey males around. Exactly. But that would be understandable to some degree. Yeah, we're looking for pre-K teachers, but unfortunately, we can't hire Conrad and Taylor. No, can't hire them. Anyway, continuing here. NGOs in the United States fighting white supremacy online. The effort to combat white supremacy online in the United States is led by three non-governmental organizations: the Anti-Defamation League, ADL, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and the Southern Poverty Law Center, SPLC. The ADL, ADL.org, is the oldest of these, founded in 1913 to stop, by appeals to reason and the conscience, and if necessary, by appeals to law, the defamation of the Jewish people. Their mission includes monitoring and taking action against white supremacy online. Currently led by Abraham Foxman and headquartered in New York City with 29 offices across the United States, the ADL has an annual budget of over $50 million. Brian Marcus, a scholar and activist, serves as director of the ADL's Internet Monitoring Unit, comprised of a team of investigative researchers and analysts who, since 1985, have gathered information about white supremacy online from their New York offices. Over the last 20 years, the ADL has expanded their internet monitoring to include the monitoring of extremists of all types, including Islamic terrorists. The ADL shares the information collected with law enforcement via a number of mechanisms, including published reports, email newsletters, and professional trainings. A valuable source for law enforcement is the ADL Law Enforcement Agency Resource Network, an online resource that receives over 1 million visitors per year. The ADL is also the only NGO in the United States that is part of the International Network Against Cyber Hate. A major resource in the effort to combat white supremacy online and offline is the Simon Wiesenthal Center. The Wiesenthal Center is an international Jewish human rights organization with a major presence in the United States, primarily in Los Angeles and New York, and an operating budget of just over $35 million. The center includes a values-based educational effort aimed at confronting anti-Semitism, racism, and hate, teaching the lessons of the Holocaust for future generations, and confronting Islamic terrorism, a relatively new emphasis. The center's educational efforts are administered primarily through the Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles and the New York Tolerance Center. Digital Terrorism and Hate, the annual interactive report CD-ROM, produced by the center, analyzes over 6,000 problematic website portals, terrorist manuals, blogs, chat rooms, videos, and hate games on the internet to promote promote racial violence, anti-Semitism, homophobia, hate music, and terrorism. The report is based on data collected by a team of researchers led by scholar activist Mark Weitzman, the director of Task Force Against Hate and Terrorism. Weitzman also serves as director of the New York Tolerance Center, and Rabbi Abraham Cooper, associate dean of the center. Translated into multiple languages, the report is distributed to government agencies, community activists, educators, and members of the media as part of the center's broader educational efforts to teach tolerance. The Southern Poverty Law Center, based in Montgomery, Alabama, has an annual operating budget of around $37 million dollars and an endowment of approximately $200 million. dollars. When founded in 1971, the SPLC was originally the small civil rights law firm of Morris Dees and Joe Levin, two lawyers committed to fighting for racial equality through the courts. Since 1981, the SPLC has been monitoring extremist white supremacist activity throughout the United States. Additionally, the SPLC has developed a K through 12 curriculum for teaching tolerance and respect in U.S. schools. Dees and Levin pioneered the legal strategy of filing civil suits against white supremacists for activities offline that escaped the reach of criminal prosecution. One of the SPLC's notable lawsuits was in response to the murder of skinheads by an Ethiopian immigrant in Portland, Oregon. I covered that story on my channel. Y'all go check out the video I made a few months ago about racism in Portland, Oregon. The skinheads who beat this man to death were acolytes of white Aryan resistance leader Tom Metzger. In October 1990, attorneys for the SPLC won a civil case on behalf of murdered hate crime victim Mulugeta Serra's family against Tom Metzger and his son John Metzger for a total of $12.5 million. The SPLC, through the efforts of Mark Potok, who heads the Intelligence Project, is also actively engaged in monitoring white supremacy online, and they keep an extensive archive of websites, blogs, and chat rooms associated with extremist groups based in the United States. It is worth briefly mapping out the conceptual differences between these three premier organizations. The ADL is a Jewish organization with a primary focus on anti-Semitism online as well as racism. As the Internet Monitoring Division has expanded their work, they have broadened their scope to include all types of political extremism, such as Islamic extremists. Similarly, the Simon Wiesenthal Center is primarily focused on anti-Semitism and casts a wider net when collecting the 6,000 problematic, quote-unquote, web sources for the Digital Hate and Terrorism Report, which includes white supremacists as well as Islamic terrorists. Of the three organizations, the SPLC is the most narrowly focused on white supremacist groups in the United States. While the SPLC does not actively monitor Islamic extremists, it does include black separatist groups in its tracking data. There is, as far as I can tell, some cooperation between the three organizations, but very little, if any, strategically coordinated efforts at addressing white supremacy online. In part, this has to do with the different missions that overlap significantly, but not completely or seamlessly. In part, the lack of strategic coordination has to do with the unique histories and constituencies of each organization. These divergent backgrounds mean that for each organization, there is a slightly different definition of the problem that overlaps or diverges from the organization's missions in various ways. In an ironic turn, the widening focus of the ADL and the Simon Wiesenthal Center to include Islamic extremists converges with the U.S. government's interest in fighting terrorism in the post-9/11 era. Similarly, the SPLC's widening scope to include black separatist groups converges with the long history of the U.S. government's interest in monitoring domestic black nationalist groups. While Islamic extremists are certainly a source of violent anti-Semitism, it is difficult to see how black nationalist groups pose a serious threat to a democratic society within the context of decades of targeted violence and harassment by the U.S. government itself. My point here in mapping out these areas of similarities and differences in strategies between and among these organizations is to illustrate how the understanding shifts depending on the lens. If the lens is extremists worldwide with an emphasis on anti-Semitism, then Islamic extremists are included with white supremacists. If the lens is extremists solely in the United States with a focus on race, then black separatists are included. When mapped in this way, the efforts the ADL Simon Wiesenthal Center and SPLC set in sharp relief a broader failure within the American society as a whole to address embedded white supremacy in a meaningful way within the cultural and social institutions. Basically, what she's saying here is that, calling everybody an extremist and monitoring Islamic extremists, black nationalist separatists, stuff like that, it cheapens the focus that needs to be had on white supremacy and white supremacist terrorist groups, right? Because if we're going to treat, the NFAC, the Not Effing Around Coalition, a bunch of black people who want to be like the white people in militias dressed in all black shooting guns, if we're treating them just the same as the Proud Boys or the Church of the Creator or the KKK or any Aryan skinhead nation, a national organization, that's not an equal comparison, right? There is no, crazy black radical nationalist separatists who just want to walk into a supermarket and murder 10 white people. That doesn't exist in America. That doesn't exist in America. Yes, there have been some black men like Christopher Dorner or like the brothers in Dallas and Baton Rouge who shot at police officers and stuff like that, or the Black Angels in San Francisco who were basically, slaughtering white people by shooting from the roofs, and also in DC as well. But these are individual cases. There are not as many cases of those types of black men doing those sorts of racially motivated crimes against white men as there are the numerous accounts. Hell, the Civil War in and of itself, every church bombing during the civil rights movement done by white supremacists, and also the continued attacks on black people from people like Peyton Gentrin walking into a supermarket and slaughtering 10 black people, and Dylan Roof as well, right? So continuing here. Individual efforts within the United States. Some have argued that the most appropriate response to white supremacy online is for individual computer users to infiltrate white supremacist websites to try and change the discursive subculture. Others have hacked hate websites to disrupt their internet service. Perhaps the most significant response from an individual activist in the United States to white supremacy online was that of David Goldman. Goldman, a Harvard Law School librarian, created a website in 1995 called Hate Watch, the first site to track white supremacy online. Goldman's Hate Watch attracted incredible media coverage and web traffic, at one point attracting 1 million visitors a year. It also attracted controversy. In 2000, film critic Roger Ebert launched a scathing public attack on Goldman at the Conference on World Affairs for linking to hate sites. Ebert argued that Hate Watch gave free publicity to haters, providing a virtual supermarket, quote unquote, for those interested in finding white supremacy online. Ebert also criticized Goldman for his failure to offer any critical analysis of the racist propaganda at these sites, unlike the ADL and Simon Wiesenthal Center that points out the lies and distortions. A year later, in 2001, Goldman stopped maintaining the site. He said it was not because of the criticism he had received, but because he felt that the site had done its job. We have succeeded in fulfilling the mission we set for ourselves, he wrote in a farewell message posted on the site. Goldman was bolstered by news that, quote unquote, hate sites simply weren't proving to be such powerful recruitment tools as many had feared. Goldman's assessment is interesting in light of the earlier discussion about social movement, recruitment, and the internet. His views coincide with my view analysis that brochure sites with static displays of information are not effective mechanisms for social movement recruitment. However, Goldman disbanded Hate Watch in 2001, just prior to the phenomenal increase in participation at Stormfront. Still, no one can blame Goldman for wanting to stop monitoring white supremacist websites after 6 years. It is difficult, sometimes courageous, and often thankless work. Individual approaches, such as Goldman's brave, if perhaps a bit misguided, actions, ultimately offer limited effectiveness on a broad scale and tend to be site specific and small scale. All right. Valuing free speech differently. Free speech is among the most highly valued ideals in mainstream American culture. This ideal is tied to Enlightenment philosophical traditions of reason and tolerance. Yet the supposedly shared American value of free speech seems less than ideal when viewed by those who are targets of hate speech. For example, a 2005 Knight Foundation study of U.S. high school age students found that African American students, 43%, and Hispanic students, 41%, were more likely likely than white students, 31%, to think the First Amendment goes too far in the rights it guarantees. Such findings from public opinion polling suggest that an early age young African American and Hispanic people realize that the ideal of free speech does not apply to them equally. Thus, they evaluate the First Amendment less favorably than white youths. The findings also suggest an epistemology that begins with an understanding of racial inequality and an ethic of caring about the victims of hate speech at the center of analysis. When divorced from this analysis of racial inequality and ethnic and ethic of caring, however, it is clear that in the United States, white supremacy online benefits from near absolute First Amendment protection. The cyber hate divide, how the U.S. response affects global response to white supremacy online. Given the nearly unanimous and international adoption of regulations restricting online hate speech, the United States stands alone in its support of free speech, including white supremacy online. One scholar has called these divergent approaches to white supremacy online the U.S./Europe cyber hate divide. Global efforts to combat white supremacy online are seriously undermined by the U.S. position in a number of ways. The cyber hate divide also means that the United States becomes the location of choice for white supremacists worldwide who wish to post their hate speech online without fear of prosecution. This practice is what another scholar has referred to as quote unquote importing hate. It is possible to prosecute someone within one national jurisdiction for material on the web that is hosted on a server in the United States, and this is what happened in the Norwegian case. Tveit's Vigrid website was hosted on a US server. Yet he was successfully prosecuted. Even so, because US based servers allow for such content, fighting white supremacy becomes an international game of whack a mole. Hate material is quashed in one jurisdiction only to pop up in another. And this is exactly what happened in Tveit's case. After serving 1 year in prison and denied a web presence for 1 year, Tveit was released from jail and put his site back online. In addition, the United States exports white supremacy via the internet. The majority of white supremacist sites online are created by Americans and hosted in the United States. Given the global nature of the web, these sites made in the United States are then available anywhere in the world, even in countries where the material is illegal. An important example of the very literal way that US based understandings of First Amendment protections for white supremacy online get exported around the world is the France versus Yahoo Inc. case. In 2000, two French NGOs, the International League Against Racism and Anti-Semitism, LICRA, and the Union of Jewish Students, filed a complaint in the French courts against Yahoo Inc., the Cupertino, California-based internet company. LICRA and the Union of Jewish Students charged that Yahoo's auction sites, available through the company's French-based affiliate, Yahoo.fr, allowed Nazi memorabilia to be sold in France where such materials are illegal. The French courts ruled in May 2000 that Yahoo Inc. was in violation of French law and must therefore make it impossible for internet users in France to access any Yahoo websites that auction anti-Semitic material. CEO Jerry Yang refused to comply with the judge's decision, saying, "We are not going to change the content of our sites in the United States just because someone in France is asking us to do so." When Yang failed to comply, the French courts began levying fines against Yahoo Inc., costing the company estimated millions. Let's think about this. Jerry Yang, I'm going to take the guess Jerry Yang is Asian. And something has to be said. Something has to be said about so many Asians willing to fight and die over defending white supremacy. Something has to be said about this. Nobody loves white supremacy more, other than white people, than Asian people. They love to uphold this thing. So Jerry Yang, the French NGOs are saying, hey, your website is selling Nazi memorabilia. Maybe you should stop doing that, because it's illegal in our country. But Jerry Yang says, no, I will fight you in court. I will stand up for my white supremacist masters. I'm going to fight on behalf of Massa. My name is Jerry Yang, and I will make sure Nazi propaganda paraphernalia will be sold in France. What a cuck. What a cuck. A lot of Asian men, unfortunately, are cucks for white supremacy. A lot of Asian men, unfortunately, are cucks for white supremacy, man. And you know exactly who I'm talking about, too. No, you know exactly who I'm talking about. Nelson Moreno says Indians are super racist. Yes, they are. And they love to uphold white supremacy, too. They're the #1 buyers of bleaching cream and cake soap. You'll never see more bleaching cream. One of the most disturbing videos. I'm telling y'all, you can find this on YouTube right now. Type in bleaching your baby, India. In India, they have videos on YouTube where you can see a woman washing her baby in bleaching cream to try to lighten its skin. Millions of views and tens of thousands of videos on it. It's real. The Asians got the Asians got BWC on the brain. The Asians love white people so much. It will be impossible to defeat white supremacy without attacking the Asian mind first. Jerry Yang, how are you going to fight for white supremacy that hard? You said Yahoo will not stop selling Nazi paraphernalia on the auction site. We don't care if it's illegal in France. My name is Jerry Yang, and I approve this message. What a cuck. Anyway, continuing here. What followed was a year-long legal battle between France and Yahoo Inc., fought in both French and U.S. courts that hinged in a very central way on the ability of individual nation-states to control white supremacy online in a global context. On the one side were the anti-racism activists who argue that French laws apply to internet content. One lawyer representing the French groups said there is this naive idea that the internet changes everything. It doesn't change everything. It doesn't change the laws in France. On the other side were leading figures in the United States who adopted a cyber libertarian approach, such as MIT's Nicholas Negroponte, who said it's not that the laws aren't relevant, it's that the nation states not relevant. The internet cannot be regulated. This quote-unquote impossibility argument was the main tenet of Yahoo Inc.'s defense. They argue that to limit what internet content users in one geographic location, for example, France, could access on the internet was an impossible technological request. But the whole world agreed to shut down Silk Road. I bought my first Bitcoin trying to buy some White Widow online for the Silk Road. I had 2 Bitcoins trying to do some illicit transactions online, and the government shut that down. The governments all across the world say, yo, it's illegal to sell drugs online, right? And I have my own opinion about that. Of course, all drugs should be legal. But the thing is, the government in France says, hey, it is not allowed to sell Nazi paraphernalia. But then these 2 smart dumbasses from MIT and in America say the internet cannot be regulated. We will have freedom of expression and we will sell you iron crosses. What type of sick stuff is this? Who thinks like this? Anyway, Nelson Moreno says Indians wake up in the morning hating their own skin color. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. All right, continuing here. The quote-unquote impossibility argument was the main tenet of Yahoo Inc.'s defense. They argued that to limit what internet content users in one geographic location, for example, France, could access on the internet was an impossible technological request. Yet this claim was at odds with the shifting technological and political reality of the internet. A key turning point in the case was evidence introduced about new technology, referred to as GeoID, that could identify and screen internet content on the basis of geographical source. In 2001, Yahoo Inc. seemed to change course and embrace the GeoID and governmental control of the internet. Early in that year, the company issued a statement that it would stop selling Nazi memorabilia on sites available in France, citing bad publicity rather than the judge's ruling. Later in 2001, Yahoo Inc. contracted with a GeoID firm to target advertising to web visitors in geographically specific locations. Then in the summer of 2002, they signed an agreement with China called the Public Pledge on Self-Discipline for the Chinese Internet Industries towards embracing the possibility of government control of the Internet. In 2005, Yahoo Inc. filed a countersuit in California against the French government for the decision in the Nazi memorabilia case, and the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals said it would rehear some arguments in the case. As of this writing, there has been no decision in this case, but the lengthy court battle and Yahoo Inc.'s conflicting stance on whether and when to cooperate with nation states who want to control internet content is telling in the French case. Yahoo Inc. resisted the French government's efforts to protect its citizens from Nazi memorabilia. In the Chinese case, Yahoo Inc. was complicit in the anti-democratic wishes of the Chinese government to prevent its citizens from accessing texts about democracy. The decision decisions by U.S.-based internet companies that operate globally have an impact well beyond the geographic borders of their home country. The United States hold a disproportionate amount of economic resources and wields an extraordinarily amount of cultural and military power in the global context. Therefore, U.S. policies exert an enormous amount of influence over the rest of the world. In protecting white supremacy online, the United States dramatically reduces the likelihood that nations who wish to regulate it will be able to do so. For other democratic nations, white supremacy online is viewed as an important human rights issue based on a collective awareness of historical inequality. Reflecting on past confrontations with Nazis and other extremists, most Europeans feel that their concerns about white supremacy online are more than justified. In contrast, the prevailing view in the United States is one of intentional disregard and indifference, in which U.S. policymakers are virtually absent from the international scene. For example, in 2000, the United States failed to send any representatives to an international conference on internet extremism hosted by the German Justice Minister. This is not the first time that the United States has stood apart from the international democratic community on issues of human rights. The United States hesitated for 40 years before ratifying and implementing a key international UN Human Rights Convention. For years, the U.S. Senate rejected human rights treaties on the grounds that they diminish basic rights, including the First Amendment right to free speech, guaranteed under the U.S. Constitution. Among the other justifications for not ratifying the terms of the 1948 Genocide Convention was an assertion that the treaty would violate states' rights, promote world government, enhance communist influence, subject citizens to trial abroad, threaten the United States form of government, and increase international entanglements. In 1988, after decades of work by senior William Proxmire, the United States finally ratified and enacted into national law the Genocide Convention Implementation Act. At that point, it became illegal under U.S. law for any group or individual to directly and publicly incite another to violate the 1948 Genocide Convention, including inciting racial or ethnic hatred. To date, this is the only international human rights norm with immediate consequences to be incorporated into U.S. law. I wonder why they said media consequences. And it seems reasonable to suggest that this international law be leveraged to effectively fight white supremacy online transnationally. Oh, media consequences because this law, sorry, okay, yeah, media consequences because this law is about publicly saying that you want to commit genocide. Okay, I get it now. All right. So the biggest barrier to this is the United States, for not only is it indifferent to addressing the issue within the global democratic community, but it also simultaneously undermines such efforts abroad by operating as a safe haven for white supremacy online and serving as the primary creator of this content available globally. The resistance to restricting white supremacy online betrays an ignorance about both the history and contemporary reality of racial inequality in the United States. Often, the embrace of restrictions for white supremacy online in other countries is contextualized by reference to specific histories of oppression from which the United States is presumably free. For example, in Goldsmith and Wu's Who Controls the Internet, the author briefly offers an explanation for why some countries ban hate speech online. They write, Germany bans Nazi speech for yet a different reason, the same reason that Japan's constitution outlaws aggressive war. It is a nation still coming to grips with the horrors it committed in its past, and it is terrified that they could happen again. Here, Goldsmith and Wu locate aggression, war, and horrors, quote unquote, within other countries and within a distant past, far removed in time, distance, and political reality from the contemporary American context. The authors here also read a kind of neurosis into the national response, saying Germany and Japan are terrified that this could happen again, not say that they are taking reasonable precautions or learning the lessons of history. Thus, while the history of fascism and totalitarianism is seen as relevant for understanding restrictions on white supremacy online in Germany and Japan, there is a tendency in the United States to ignore or downplay the formative effects of colonialism, slavery, ongoing and systemic racism, and the white racial frame on the acceptance of white supremacy online. Free speech, freedom from hate, cyber libertarians versus critical race theory. Cyber libertarians like John Perry Barlow view internet regulations as antithetical to principles of freedom in cyberspace and in the U.S. Constitution. The cyber libertarian view holds that a quote unquote select number of essential freedoms, including freedom of speech, are understood to be absolute and not negotiable or subject to being balanced. For cyber libertarians, white supremacy online is a trivial concern compared to the regulation of white supremacy online, which is viewed as a more serious threat. For those who adopt this view, the stories of the Norwegian man arrested and authoring a white supremacist website, or the raid on Germans who used eBay to trade in Nazi memorabilia, are cautionary tales about what happens when free speech gets trampled. Indeed, they view the regulation of the internet as perhaps the most important threat to the civil rights in the digital age, to the exclusion of all other threats. Mike Godwin, author of Cyber Rights, Defending Free Speech in the Digital Age, argues convincingly for the need to protect freedom of speech, freedom of expression as a fundamental right for ensuring individual liberty in a democracy. In a chapter of his book called When Words Hurt, Two Hard Cases About Online Speech, Godwin takes on the critique of feminist legal scholar Catherine McKinnon, who argues that words have power to harm. Her argument consists with the with what her argument, consistent with that made by critical race theorists, claims that beyond instances in which words incite people to act in violent ways, some words enact domination and oppression. Godwin takes this claim and uses it to shore up his assessment that free speech is to be valued above all other rights. The reason freedom of speech matters is that words do have power. They can inspire both pleasant and unpleasant thoughts and feelings in the minds of others. If speech and expression don't matter, if they weren't able to have such a strong effect on us much of the time, far fewer of us would feel the impulse to ban or restrict what other people say. But neither would so many of us defend free speech as vehemently as we do. Here, Godwin acknowledges the power of words and reaffirms the need to protect free speech. Yet, Godwin frames his analysis in this chapter in such a way as to trivialize the power of words and the critique of that power offered by McKinnon. Godwin's assessment of the importance of free speech rests on an analysis of the internet and the exchange of information it facilitates as existing apart from political and social context. Such an analysis does not take race into consideration and offers no mechanism for evaluating claims for racial or social justice against the protection of free speech. Godwin's cyber libertarian frame of free speech as separate from a social and political context systematically disadvantages some members of society while it privileges others. For example, the lived experience of Bonnie Johari and her daughter illustrates the way this interpretation of free speech online can have real consequences for people's lives. The ethos that information wants to be free, quote unquote, means that Bonnie Johari and her daughter are less free. Framing white supremacy online exclusively as a free speech issue simultaneously enables the formation of a translocal white identity through the internet and shifts focus away from any analysis of the human rights of those targeted by violent white supremacy online. People who are members of already marginalized groups. Arguments in favor of an absolutist interpretation of the First Amendment are the product of historically, socially, and culturally situated knowledge. Many of the first developed technological advances that gave rise to the internet were created in Northern California, much of it in and around Palo Alto Research Center, or PARC. Following those technological innovations were a remarkable series of innovations in business that gave rise to a new industrial sector centered in San Jose, California, just south of San Francisco, in an area dubbed Silicon Valley. The inequalities of race, class, and gender of the broader social context were reinscribed within this newly developed industrial sector. Given the confluence of cyber technology and internet industry in one geographic region, it is not surprising that a particular set of social and cultural commentators emerged alongside these milieu and shaped our views of cyber culture. Cyber libertarians Barlow and Godwin are part of this cultural milieu, and their view of free speech is a product of this setting. Critics outside the United States, such as Richard Barbrook, have argued that beyond the quote unquote techno mysticism, for example, in Barlow's manifesto, is a legitimizing is a legitimating ideology for a 19th century form of nasty, brutish capitalism. Barbrook argues that those who share this perspective envision the internet as a sort of unregulated marketplace usually found only in economics textbooks. Barbrook, with Cameron, writes, instead of supporting a caring society, they hope that technological progress into the 21st century will inevitably lead back to 19th century tooth and claw capitalism. While Barbrook's critique errs in its hyperbole, the cyber libertarian view of free speech does support an analogous cyber libertarian model of business that is peculiar to a specific geographic, temporal, social, and cultural context. The cyber libertarian view of the internet is one rooted in a particular American geography, imbued with a frontier ethos tied to both a free market analysis of the internet and a very recent misreading of the First Amendment as an absolute protection of all speech. Barlow's pithy aphorism that in cyberspace the First Amendment is a quote unquote local ordinance takes on new meaning when we consider the specific context of the emergence of an absolutist defense of free speech online. Of course, this is not a view of the First Amendment that is universally shared, even within the United States. Critical race theorists take a different approach to the First Amendment, writing from a critical race perspective in the introduction to their volume, Words That Wound. Legal scholars Mary J. Matsuda, Charles R. Lawrence III, and Richard Delgado and Kimberly Crenshaw address those who defend an absolutist view of the free speech in the following. Words like intolerant, silencing, McCarthyism, censors, and orthodoxy are used to portray women and people of color as oppressors and to pretend that the powerful have become powerless. Stripped of its context, this is a seductive argument. The privileged and power of white male elites is wrapped in the rhetoric of politically unpopular speech. At the same time, the critical race theorists argue that we should entertain the absolutist free speech arguments. They also contend that we should place the stories of the victims, those on the receiving end of hate speech, at the center of our analysis. Indeed, when we reframe white supremacy online such that at the center of our analysis is the damage to the dignity of human beings, the issue looks quite different than when framed exclusively as an issue of free speech. This may be a more challenging task within the information age, in which there is a plethora of multivocal stories to be heard. It is not impossible. Critical race theory faces other, very real challenges in the digital era. One particularly strenuous critique of the Speech Act perspective, the notion that speech constitutes action and a central feature of critical race theory, is Judith Butler's critique. Butler incorporates McKinnon's argument about speech enacting gender oppression with the critical race theorist argument that words wound in the realm of racial oppression. Butler argues that when race and gender scholars emphasize the damage that words can do, they often fail to fully take into account the state's ability to powerfully enact words in a way that has the potential to harm real people in life-altering ways. In an analysis of white supremacy such as the one at hand, it seems that the racist state, as David Theo Goldberg argues, is a powerful force for maintaining racial inequality. Given that the racist state implements systemic racism, most notably through the criminal justice system, the notion that the state might be an effective arbiter of white supremacy online seems deeply flawed. This is a different argument than the content-free version offered by cyber libertarians. Furthermore, while critical race theory offers a powerful critique of racist hate speech, it inadequately addresses the more sophisticated forms of white supremacy online, such as cloak sites and the vast number of posts at Stormfront, many of which do not meet the legal standard of hate speech. Cushy said, "Good morning. Good morning, Cushy." In conclusion, the move from print to digital media marks a new global and internet worked era of white supremacy online that requires global responses. Freedom of speech and the protection of equality are both fundamental to the preservation of human dignity. Within a global context, there is a near universal agreement among democratic nations that these human rights should be weighed against one another. The United States stands in stark relief against the global community, functioning as a haven and importers, exporter for white supremacy online. Yet even the type of anti-racism legislation adopted in the rest of the world would be inadequate to address the kind of cloaked sites developed by white supremacists in the United States. In order to engage in a meaningful fight against white supremacy online and offline in a global context, we need a new strategy. In the information age, old and new media white supremacy coverage to undermine civil rights, meaning that we need better and more ways to think critically about the internet, race, and multiple intersecting forms of oppression. And it is that need for an alternative that I turn in the last chapter. So that's the end of chapter 9. Very interesting. My opinion about free speech. Of course, free speech is important, but there is some speech that needs to be regulated. Not everything that should be said, not everything that can be said should be said. And yeah, there needs to be limits on that. So when it comes to chapter 10, unfortunately, guys, I hate to say it, but we got to do one extra video. I do not have enough time to read chapter 10 to close this series. So, I did my best. I read for about an hour and a half, but chapter 10, the final chapter, I promise, will be the last chapter we will read. I will have to do it after my English class, so I'll come back online like around 6:30 or 6:15 and finish up this last chapter. Ozzy says, great work, Simon. Thank you, Ozzy. Thank you. Thank you. Nelson Moreno says, biggest lesson from this book is that the Nazis are incredibly persistent in spreading their word, even sophisticated. Sophisticated. I mean, the way Stormfront came about and the way they're able to stay online is sophisticated, yes, because, creating a successful forum does take hard work. It's not easy. Not everybody could do it right. Like I'm working on my YouTube channel and I got 2 people in the chat. So, it's hard to create any sort of online platform community. So Stormfront was a sophisticated process, but a lot of the other white supremacist websites in themselves fail. But they are sophisticated in continuing to let their stuff permeate upwards, go out into the zeitgeist, and also creating the cloaked websites. The cloaked websites are very, very sophisticated, and that's something that we need to look out for. In my opinion, the law in America should be that sort of hate speech, like what's on JewWatch.com or the American Civil Rights Review, those websites should be taken down. They should be blocked. Those sorts of misinformation. We could simply have a misinformation law in the U.S. that says if you are spreading things that are patently false, that is not protected under freedom of speech, right? That's what we could have in the U.S. To stop the white supremacy online, right? Continuing here, Nelson Moreno says, about to host a Redbone Pog volleyball tourney at my barbecue. Damn, Nelson, I got to get invited. Redbone Pog volleyball tourney. That's a party right there. That's a party. I'm going to bring me and my big booty wife. Maybe we'll flip one of them red bones. Yeah. They got a lot of red bones in Lisbon. Lisbon, home of the red bones. Where, where Colonial Dick brought you the Cape Verdeans. Oh, man. Okay. So, chapter 10. Chapter 10, we'll pick up with this next time. Catch y'all at 6:30. Catch you at 6:30 p.m. my time. Where I'm at right now, it's 4:38 p.m. I gotta go to work, do a class. I'll be right back, and I'll chop it up with y'all later. Y'all be easy. Shout out to Ozzy. Shout out to Nelson Moreno. Shout out to Cushy, and peace.